You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and let's jump right into this update on the case that I brought you on September 30th about Justie Stilwell out of Bay City, Michigan. And before I dive in, I need to give a shout out to a listener named Alexandria who sent me the M Live news article about this update. M Live did some fantastic work here, and I'm relying heavily on the news piece that was authored by Cole Waterman. Okay, now, you might remember this case where a young girl was fishing with her grandpa when she found what she thought was a human foot near the Edward M. Golson boat launch by the Independence Bridge in Bay City. That discovery coincided with a report by Justie's family saying that the 41-year-old custodian at TL Handy Middle School had not been heard from in 5 days, and he had failed to show up for his work shift for the past 2 days. This was very, very unusual for the kind-hearted and dedicated worker. So we have the police trying to literally piece together a human, finding more body parts and trying to establish an identity in this horrific crime. And at the same time, Justie's family is reporting him missing and conducting their own sort of search. Well, one day after they reported him missing, and also one day after the still unidentified remains were found, Justie's family found his maroon Jeep parked at Defoe Park. The family and police had both visited and entered Justie's home, and nothing really looked amiss. The Jeep, however, had some issues. What looked to be blood was found inside, and of course, there's the obvious. There's a Jeep parked there, but where's Justie? Police grabbed some surveillance footage from one of Justie's neighbors showing that Jeep left his home at about 10 p.m. on September 14th. All right, that was 4 days before he was reported missing. Investigators also began gathering evidence from the Jeep. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab was also working on the human remains, and through fingerprints, they discovered that their missing person was now a homicide case. Justie was indeed the murdered man whose portion of his body had been discovered in the water. Now, the investigators turned to Justie's social media accounts and also to his cell phone records, along with his bank records. They're just trying to build a timeline from the day his Jeep left his home and then to the day it ended up parked at Defoe Park with blood and human tissue in the cargo area. Here's where investigators got a break. Justie's GPS that they discovered via his email pinged near 40-year-old Robert D. Tweedley's house. The time of the ping kind of piques investigators' interest. It's 2:08 a.m. And then the phone becomes inoperable after that. There is no more pinging happening. So the phone was either turned off or destroyed. Now we need to understand that all that they're discovering, this timeline, it's tight. All of this is happening or unfolding in about a 24-hour period. On the night of September 19th, so this is little more than a day since the remains were discovered by the teen girl and her grandfather, a man came forward. He informed police that he knew Justie. They had linked up on the Grindr app, and this man told the police that he and Justie had exchanged messages on September 14th. So keep in mind, that's the night that the neighbor's camera caught Justie's Jeep leaving his house. Now, this man told police that Justie had said he was going to walk to his friend's house. The man said Justie said that the friend was kind of distraught and no longer talking to him, so Justie, being the good guy he is, he was just going to go check on his friend. And this guy who's talking to police, the acquaintance on Grindr, he was doing his own detective work in the background. When he learned via media reports that the body parts found in the bay belonged to Justie, he used his sleuthing skills to figure out who Justie was going to visit. Feeling pretty confident about who Justie was checking in on, he went ahead and messaged that man, and he started a conversation. Through the convo, the man asked the suspected Justie visitation recipient for a selfie. That man obliged, And the amateur detective turned that selfie over to the police when he told them the whole Grindr app story about Justie. So now, armed with the selfie, investigators used facial recognition software and they identified the Grindr user that Justie was potentially supposed to meet up with. His name is Robert Tweedley. That's the guy who lived in the house near where Justie's phone had pinged in the middle of the night. Investigators then linked Robert to a Facebook page with the alias Justin Allen Powell. That Facebook page had multiple posts about getting back on his meds and working on detoxing his life. They also had several pictures now of Robert to work with. Investigators were particularly alarmed by a post from September 15th. Okay, that's the day after Justie was last seen. In that post, Robert references cleaning his home and that he's now on a cleaning kick, but that he wished he had some better cleaning supplies. He also references that he hasn't had any sleep. Well, investigators' working theory was that by the time that Robert made that particular post, Justie had already been murdered. So was Robert cleaning up a crime scene? Well, probably, but we'll see. That's when another tip was called in, referencing Grindr again. This tip came from a man who knew both Justie and Robert. He had messages with Justie suggesting a meetup at the Golson boat launch. So we've now got a suggestion for where Justie liked to meet up with people that matches where his body parts were found. All of this led to investigators canvassing Robert's neighbors. One neighbor said Robert had an abnormally large fire in his backyard, either on the night of the 14th or the 15th. More canvassing led to police watching surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart. And guess what they found on that video? Justie's Jeep, except it's not being driven by Justie. Exiting the Jeep in that video is Robert, and he's in a baseball cap that matches the selfies on his fake Facebook profile. Now, more video footage from inside the store shows Robert visiting the sporting goods section where he selected 2 100-foot braided anchor lines. Okay, all of that, the video outside of the Walmart store and the video inside of the Walmart store in the sporting goods section, that all happened on the night when Justie's Jeep was caught leaving his house on the neighbor's cameras. Okay, this wasn't Robert's only visit to Walmart, though. On the day it was announced that the body parts had been identified as belonging to Justie, Robert went back to that Walmart and he purchased an axe and also packs of reusable lawn bags. You know, the super durable kind of lawn bags? Well, investigators feel like they're locked and loaded at this point. It's time to search Robert's house and get his statement. With a warrant in hand, police descended on Robert's home, waking him from sleep. And according to MLive, Robert asked if he could speak to the guy in charge. That's when the gory details of Justie's murder were revealed piece by piece to the detectives investigating the murder. On the morning of September 25th, when police began working their way through Robert's home, they found disturbing evidence of a violent scene in the basement. On the concrete floor were several strike marks, newly made and consistent with the blade of an axe. In the fire pit out back, investigators uncovered several charred items, like a mop head and some of the clothing and electronic devices, or at least pieces of electronic devices. Once seated at the police station in an interrogation room, Robert began telling his story, including his history and his difficulties. As he smoked and sipped on water, he recounted that he had moved to the Bay City area about a year and a half prior. Once he got comfortable talking about his transition to Bay City, he eventually waived his Miranda rights, explaining to detectives that he wanted to, quote, do this quick and not waste anyone's time. He told detectives that the last few months had been a spiral of harmful activity. He admitted to getting hooked on meth and fighting the urges to harm himself and others. He claimed in the interview that he had tried to seek mental health services, but that he couldn't get anyone to help him. He told detectives that he had become familiar with Justie about 2 months before his death, and that Justie had been kind to him, even helping him by loaning him gas money. As detectives probed Robert about the details of his relationship with Justie, Robert admitted Justie had come to his house recently. Robert allegedly admitted that Justie was just a nice person who wanted to be there to help him. And then he apparently said the night that Justie visited went bad. He told investigators he had drank about 14 beers and done some meth, and after that, he just blacked out. He said when he came to, he was cleaning up a bloody scene with his mop and some water. He then went on to tell police that he must have fallen asleep again at some point, and when he awoke on the couch, he thought he had experienced a really horrible dream. He said he didn't realize that the nightmare was reality until he heard the media reports about Justie's body parts being found near the bridge. Okay, there's still gaps though at this point. Like, how did he kill Justie? Well, when asked that, apparently Robert said he wasn't quite sure. He thought maybe he had pushed him down the basement stairs, and he reasoned this because he knew Justie was set to leave his house, and that's when he reacted and strangled him or pushed him, or maybe both. Robert vaguely had a memory of stealing about $40 in cash from Justie's wallet. He said he grabbed Justie's keys to the Jeep, and he walked the short distance to Justie's house. He said he then drove the Jeep to Walmart and bought the rope. Police say he admitted to dismembering Justie's body using the axe in the basement. He then transported the body parts in the cargo area of the Jeep and threw them in the Saginaw River near Golson Nature Area. After he had transferred the body parts, he said he allegedly ditched the Jeep in Defoe Park. And then he said he walked home and he slept. Now, all of this occurred in the initial portions of the interview. It seems as Robert became more comfortable with telling the details, his memory started to become sharper. Eventually, police say he admitted to remembering that he and Justie had been hugging because Justie was comforting Robert when he had started to tear up. It was then that the scene turned dark, and police say he admitted to killing Justie. Police say he also admitted to burning Justie's belongings like his clothes and his cell phone. Police also say Robert admitted he should have just called 911 and had police come to his house. But instead, he chose to use the axe to dismember Justie and then chose to transport portions of his body to dump sites in several different trips. At the end of the interview, Robert penned an apology letter to Justie's family. That letter is now evidence in the criminal case against Robert. After all of this, Robert was charged with open murder and disinterment or mutilation of a dead body. Almost 2 weeks ago, he was court-ordered to undergo an evaluation at the Center for Forensic Psychiatry. There, he will be evaluated for competency. So can he even stand trial for Justie's murder? We'll have to wait and see. This story is yet to be finished. I'll let you know what is decided about Robert and if he will face a jury trial for the murder of Justie Stilwell. In that September 30th episode, we remembered Justie for his unique artwork and his soft and gentle nature. He loved working on genealogy and nurturing his hobby of photography. He is survived by his mother and 2 brothers and a sister. Left behind is a much-loved cat named Mango. Now to another listener suggestion, this one by Jess. So thank you, Jess. And I should tell you, I love sports. That's how I got my start in journalism. I was the sports editor of my high school newspaper, and then I went on to be the sports editor of my college paper. So, of course, when this story was sent in, I was intrigued. And this story has strains of Larry Nassar and the U.S. gymnastics scandal, except it's male athletes and it's basketball. Here's where we're at. Former Indiana men's collegiate basketball players, Haris Mujizenovic. Harris, I hope I got that right. And then the other one is Charlie Miller. Well, they filed a class action complaint in federal court accusing former Indiana team physician Brad Bomba of medically unnecessary, invasive, and sexually abusive rectal examinations during their playing days at Indiana. So you might be asking, why are they suing the university if the doctor did the alleged abusing? Well, the players contend that Indiana University is liable because the abuse is considered a Title IX violation. Consistently, Title IX has protected student athletes from sexual assault or sex-based harassment in campus-funded activities. And if a university receives federal funding, they're held to the standards of Title IX. But it goes a little bit further than that. The civil lawsuit claims the university was aware of the, quote, routine, pervasive, repeated sexual assaults, and also that the university mishandled and turned a blind eye to the men's basketball players' complaints concerning Dr. Bomba. Now, the suit claims that the two men, they had to make a choice. They either had to endure the continued abuse or they would lose out on the opportunity to play for the highly prestigious basketball program, and they'd also lose out on completing their education under a scholarship opportunity. Now, it's not just the two men, Harris and Charlie. Another player has obtained separate counsel, indicating that he will possibly file a lawsuit in the future. And with the two men stepping forward and making the claims public, more former athletes could join their suit. Now, let's look at the third man. This man might file a lawsuit. He played for Indiana in the 90s under infamous coach Bobby Knight. So if you're older, you might remember that he's the chair-throwing, angry-tempered coach who won 3 national titles during his tenure at Indiana. Now, the statement from this third player who might file suit, he goes on to state that this former athlete, he feels the university was only concerned with winning games and protecting reputations. He said in his statement that he was subjected to sexual abuse and emotional torment at IU, and that he carries the impacts of that abuse with him every day. Now, Harris and Charlie, they also attended the university in the 90s. And Dr. Brad Bomba, he's no longer at the university, but the lawsuit lays out that when he was there, certain athletes were assigned specifically to Dr. Bomba by men's basketball athletic trainer Tim Garl. And Tim Garl still works for IU. The lawsuit states that during their playing years, the athletes would discuss the invasive exams openly amongst themselves in the locker room. And those conversations happened in front of coaches and employees and trainers of IU. So these men are saying the university knew that Bomba was abusing the players. The lawsuit then states that these boys were just young men, late teens, early 20s. And at that time, they didn't realize until they graduated from the university and entered different professions and life paths that what had happened to them wasn't normal. They said that they should have never had to have aggressive digital rectal exams regularly during their visits to the team doctor. Now, the university has responded and has begun a review process into Dr. Bomba's behavior. They released a statement about the investigation, and to be honest, it's a lengthy statement and it's kind of public relations blah, blah, blah heavy. I get it. They're just covering themselves, and this is how it has to work. But here's the gist of that statement. They say that IU has a set of standards and values, and they hold true to those standards. They then address the letter from the attorneys for Harris and Charlie, saying because of the allegations, they themselves have retained their own counsel and that they will review witness interviews while also reviewing all available documentation and evidence. They hope to determine if the conduct was appropriate or transversely inappropriate. They say they will also determine if coaches, trainers, and other employees were aware of the alleged abuse. They then say it is an independent review, so go ahead and trust them because it's going to be independent, and they ask for patience as that review is conducted. Okay, see, wasn't that much quicker than the 6-paragraph statement that I could have read to you? Now, I just want to point this out. Some of these abuse civil suits have big money attached. Michigan settled a suit in 2022 that included over 1,000 victims. That settlement was for $490 million. And USC settled a lawsuit with multiple athletes for $852 million. And of course, the Larry Nassar settlement was for $380 million. So here we have less athletes, obviously, at this time, only 3, but the dollars could be relative. So I'll keep an eye out and let you know how this one turns out. And let's finish today with a couple of high-profile cases that involve rich men allegedly raping and sex trafficking other younger men. Okay, first, the new allegations. Former Abercrombie Fitch CEO Mike Jeffries was arrested this week and federally charged with sex trafficking. The case originated in the Eastern District of New York, and it's not the first time we have seen dirty info arise on Mike Jeffries. The scathing documentary, The Abercrombie Guys, The Dark Side of Cool, well, it highlighted the many lawsuits alleging discriminatory hiring practices that occurred while Mike was the CEO of the company. Okay, I haven't watched that doc, but Abercrombie & Fitch and Hollister, seriously, in the 2000s, those stores were so dimly lit, you would whack your shin on a display table because you were so busy suffocating from the perfume and the cologne. And all of that was occurring while the music was so loud that I couldn't hear the sales associate even tell me the total amount I owed for that really cute yet overpriced floral skirt that I was buying for Peyton. So I've got my own level of PTSD about Abercrombie & Fitch, but it's nothing compared to these new charges leveled against Mike Jeffries. So let's just dive into the investigation that referenced a 2023 BBC investigation. And in that investigation, it was alleged Mike and his business partner, Matthew Smith, were part of a highly organized network that involved a middleman who would procure young men to participate in sex events with Mike. All right, so the charges involve 8 men. The BBC investigation involves 12 men. I just want to make sure that's clear here. So these 12 men told the BBC that they attended the events, and some of the men were abused while in attendance. Here's the key to this case, though. The alleged middleman. Well, he says the sex events absolutely happened, but that the men all had knowledge of what they were getting into, so no crime was committed. But the details of these events are now more clear thanks to the 8 men who came forward in the charges. Okay, I first want to point out that these men, Matt and Mike, they are older dudes. And when the abuse was allegedly occurring, they were in their 40s and 50s, respectively. The alleged abused men were in their late teens and early 20s. So I've got problems with that, but that's just a Julie thing. I feel like it's grooming behavior when you have that big of an age disparity. Now, the BBC is saying that they interviewed those 12 men for their investigation and that their memories or recounting of the sex events had very striking similarities. The men were told if they attended the parties that they could have an opportunity of modeling for Abercrombie & Fitch. Also, 11 of the 12 felt exponentially harmed by the events that happened. So let me just give you one example of how this worked. The middleman would contact an attractive male and offer him an opportunity to meet with the owners of Abercrombie & Fitch. Now, during the initial communication with the model, there would be no mention of sex or any kind of an exchange of favors for making your career bigger. But when the young men would show up for the initial meeting, the middleman would then negotiate something like oral sex in exchange for a meetup with the owners. So the middleman is getting his due here. Now, that activity was allegedly occurring between the middleman and the young model, and all of that's happening before we actually get to the sex events with Matt and Mike. So once the middleman found a young model who might comply, he would extend an invitation to the model to a daytime event at Mike's house in the Hamptons on Long Island. The invitation would be laced with words like, "Hey, you know, this Mike guy, he's a powerful man. He can make or break your career." So the young model would then be given gift cards to go purchase outfits at Abercrombie & Fitch. So when the model showed up, he could feel kind of official and legitimate. Once the young model would arrive at the house in the Hamptons, he would have some get-to-know-you convos. It would be very casual. Once things felt more natural, the young man would allegedly be offered drugs called poppers, which I learned in researching this story is a drug that is held under the nose, causing a strong head rush and some disorientation. Now, once that disorientation set in, the sex acts would allegedly begin. Men who attended these events told the BBC that Mike Jeffries and Matthew Smith would engage in sexual activity with about 4 men at the same time, or they would potentially direct them to have sex with each other. Afterwards, the men said staff at the event handed them envelopes filled with thousands of dollars in cash. And here's where the no crime concept comes into play. The middleman admits this happened, but he says the models all signed non-disclosure agreements before attending the events and that they willingly accepted the gifts and the travel accommodations. Domestic staff who worked in Mike's former Hamptons home, well, they told the BBC that these events were held there regularly on weekends. Some said they were instructed to leave the premises every Saturday afternoon for several years, leading them to believe something strange was taking place on all of those Saturdays. One former staffer said he understood it was because his boss was, quote, having playtime. Now, all of the 12 men who spoke to the BBC, they said the events were directly linked to furthering their careers. I could go much deeper with this story, but I think you have the idea here, and I think we've had enough lewd content in today's episode. So let's just leave it at this. There are lots of events, even in other countries, and there's lots of claims that there are far more victims than the 12 interviewed by the BBC and the 8 that the federal charges are connected to. So as you can expect, all the parties involved are being pretty hush about this. Mike's lawyers have said they will not be commenting. Matthew's lawyers did not respond to requests. And the middleman said the following: everyone who attended these events came in with their eyes wide open. There was no coercion, and they were fully consensual. All right, the charges filed against the 3 men, Mike, Matthew, and the middleman, well, they include a single count of sex trafficking by the 3 men and 15 counts of interstate prostitution tied to 15 other victims. The charges are related to alleged offenses that occurred from 2008 to 2015. So I'll keep watching this case and let you know once the 3 men make their appearances in an NYC courtroom. And let's finish with the other high-dollar alleged sex assault, this one with a P Diddy update. Okay, you guys, there is no way I can go over what has stacked up against P Diddy at this point. Let's just say this. There's multiple lawsuits, there's federal charges, and there's 2 failed attempts at being granted bail. So P Diddy is still locked up, and now there is more reported lawsuits, and his kids are speaking out. So let's start out with the newest lawsuit, or 7 lawsuits to be more accurate. 2 of the lawsuits are filed by people who said they were minors at the time of their assaults. One of the lawsuits states that in 2000, a woman listed as Jane Doe in the lawsuit was invited to attend an after party following the VMAs. Jane Doe says she was given a drink at P. Diddy's after party that made her feel drowsy. She wandered around until she found a place to lie down. Eventually, she's lying on the bed, and she said P. Diddy joined her in that room with a male celebrity and a female celebrity. Now, neither celebrity is named in the suit. Jane Doe says she was sexually assaulted by the male celebrity first, while P. Diddy and the female watched. Then she said P. Diddy assaulted her as the other 2 watched. So I'm going to spare you any more of the disgusting details, but it's much the same as other suits that we've covered. Now, another one of the suits filed by John Doe says he was an aspiring music artist in 2022. So this one's very recent. And when the assault happened, he was just 17 years old. In that suit, John Doe claims he was drugged at a P. Diddy party and assaulted by the music mogul. John Doe said P. Diddy told him he would make him a star. So those are specifics on 2 of the 7 new suits. Of course, P. Diddy's lawyers, when asked about the new 7 suits, well, they're referring back to their previous statements where they said the lawsuits are all frivolous. Okay, that's a brief update on the civil cases. In P. Diddy's criminal case, his lawyers are asking the judge to let him out on bail again. 3rd time's the charm, I guess. And they're also asking that potential witnesses be required to have kind of some sort of a gag order that they shouldn't be speaking about the alleged information. Oral arguments on those matters are set for November 4th. And now let's go over what P Diddy's kids are saying. Well, they issued a joint statement. It's kind of a statement. It's more like a social media post. And it happened on Tuesday. Here's what it said. The past month has devastated our family. Many have judged both him, meaning P Diddy, and us based on accusations, conspiracy theories, and false narratives that have spiraled into absurdity on social media. We stand united, supporting you every step of the way, meaning they're supporting their dad. We hold on to the truth, knowing it will prevail, and nothing will break the strength of our family. We miss you and love you, Dad. All right. How many times will we revisit this case? The answer is as many times as we need to shed light on the abuse that permeates the music and movie industry. Like I said in the last update, if only 1% or 10% of the hundreds of accusations against P. Diddy are true, then all the reporting is worth the effort and all the highlighting in social media, if it's accurate, is worth the effort. All right, that's your Thursday episode on Rise and Crime. Next time, I'll try to make it less lewd. It was just so graphic this time around. You guys, thanks for joining me here on Rise and Crime. I do say always, whenever I talk to anybody, I have the best listeners, and there was evidence because 2 of the cases we covered today were from suggestions from listeners. Please, if you haven't left a 5-star review, I would love for you to go ahead and do that, and positive comments are always welcome. And you can go ahead and like and follow us on all of our social media accounts. That includes YouTube and Instagram. And we have the 3 podcasts here at Oh No Media. We have Into the Dark, Rise and Crime, and of course, Murder with My Husband. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.